Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. I am Professor Bhangya Bhukya. I teach history at University of Hyderabad. I am currently also heading the department. At the outset, I thank Nomad Liberty Movement people for organizing this Facebook lecture. Disha actually have been asking me this for a long time from the lockdown time. So somehow we managed to have it today. Well, many of you must have read my work, particularly subjugated nomads and also the roots of the periphery, as well as my journal articles and all. So basically today what I am going to offer you is again a broad historical experience of nomadic community of India, which is actually neglected both in academics and in society also. Nobody actually recognizes this community or these people, that there is this kind of community, this kind of life, and people living with a particular reality and so and so. So you will surprise if you see the percentage of nomadic communities and nomadic people in this country. Actually, the nomadic community population constitutes almost 15% of India's population, and they are scattered. Their existence is actually completely abrashed and neglected in all aspects. It is only from the recent time, means when Indian government started setting up a separate DNT, nomadic and semi-nomadic commission, there is some move to dig the history of these communities. I think apart from the denotified communities, which are about 200, there are many, thousands of communities actually, which are many of them still living on nomadism in one form or another form. So, except some initiatives, we don't have any specific program, development programs for these communities. Now there is as I told you, some move from the government side. So as I told you, I'll actually take you into history and explain you who are these nomadic communities and what were their historical experiences. So these communities sometimes in some areas are called DNTs. Sometimes they are in SC list or in BC list, ST list. So they are actually scattered in a different administrative categories as well. But I mean, so let me tell you this at the beginning. Nomadic communities, all DNT communities are no nomadic communities, no doubt about it. But all nomadics are not DNTs. Okay. So many of you, since you are working with the DNT communities, you know what is the DNT communities. Means after repealing of 1871 Criminal Tribes Act, the communities which were notified as criminal tribes under this act are now called as denotified tribes. So, I mean, if you see the history of any given society, you will find three categories of social groups. One is peasantry community, second is nomadic community, the third one is forest groups. And all the three social groups lives in a particular geographical terrain and maintain their own social character and system. So it is it's a general phenomenon. When it comes to Indian history, large group embraced nomadism in response to the normative system that was developing in the plain areas, or say mainland of India. So as a state was forming, and different rules and regulations were put in place, many individuals, communities actually run away from this mainstream society and started leading a nomadic life. And during course of this, many individuals and communities had actually adopted different occupations. So you see, I mean, so within the nomadic communities, different kinds of heterogeneous social group. So nomadic groups in India are not homogeneous groups. Okay, and there is different kinds of social, religious system followed by these communities, and many of these communities also have their own language, own religious practices, traditions. They have their own gods. So I mean, they are actually kind of autonomous communities maintaining a autonomous system, which is largely different from the mainstream society as well. So if you see these nomadic communities, the large group constitutes pastoral communities. Okay, pastoral communities, pastoralism was one of the prominent character of early society. Actually, the human civilization started with the pastoralism. We all know that, and many communities continued this practice. Okay, even in the later course of the time as well. So particularly Gujars, Pardis, Banjaras, Bhils, Meenas, Kurbas, Kurmas, Dhangars. There are many communities which had been continued pastoralism till recent times. Okay, down into 20th century, and some communities are still I mean, it's like Gujars, you must have seen in Aruna, I mean, Himachal and Kashmir region. Still, they are on move, particularly in the north, West India. There are some communities still on move. So, and cattle breeding was and is main source of their livelihood. So these communities, I mean, so the pastoral communities actually constitutes a larger share in the nomadic communities component. And then you have hunters and trappers of birds, animals, and there are some communities gamer, such as Konda Reddis, Chenchus, Kadars, and Chola Nayakas, Kakipakis in Kerala. So like this, there is a social group in the nomadic community which are living on hunting and gaming and trapping animals. You still see some communities, the rat picker basically. I mean, they are nomads. Okay, and you also see some communities surveying on small trade or some kind of trading activities. So they are called in history iterate traders. Okay. I mean, so particularly Banjaras are known for this practice. In the Telugu region, we have a Pushalavaru. I mean, so basically they sell women cosmetics and various other small items. So like this, you have iterate petty trading communities among the nomadic communities. And you also have some artisan communities within the nomadic communities. The artisan communities means you see everywhere, like lohars, kaikadis, who are basket makers, kewards, jute makers, jute weavers, Erukulas, basket makers. There are many other such communities across the country who are now involved in a particular artisanal work. It means mat making, particularly basket making, and jute weaving, rope making. So various kinds of lohars. Lohars are basically one of the very major community in north western India. Of course, across the country, till recent time they used to move from one village to another village and make utensils, cooking utensils for villagers. And you also have some other group, what do you call, entertaining communities. So after pastoralists, entertaining group is another largest group among the nomadic communities. There are many such communities. I mean, in almost in all the regions. You must have seen this Nandiwala, Sapwala, Bandarwala, many other such entertaining group using some animal or bird, parrots, owls, some kinds of animals, and also there is a group which actually perform Bhagavatism and Puranic stories. Okay, so this entertaining community actually means go to the villages and perform their art and earn their bread. So like this, there are many other communities as well. The other community is like fortune tellers. Okay, fortune tellers and medical men. Like in our Telugu region, we have a community called Koyas. Koyas are actually one group within the Koyas are known for fortune telling. And in Marathwada region, you have Vaidis, means Joliwala, Budaks. So these kinds of communities, which these communities are historically involved medical practice and herbal medicine, medical practice, and fortune telling. And there is another group which actually involved in mythological storytelling and also spreading religious ideas. So I mean, somehow from medieval period there was attempt by various communities to articulate their caste origin mythology, generally connecting to Brahmanical gods and Brahmanical mythology. So this tendency actually produced a huge number of nomadic communities in India. Almost every community in India has their caste storyteller or mythological storytellers. Okay, and they actually played very important role. And also there, I mean, during medieval period, there was Brahmanical revival movement in form of bhakti. Okay, there was Vaishnava bhakti movement, there was Saiva bhakti movement, particularly in Deccan India, Veera Saiva movement, Veera Vaishnava movement actually produced a huge number of these religious mendicant groups who were actually laymen, goes to village and spread message of Saivism and Vaishnavism. Okay, so like this various communities carving out from the village community started one or another particular trait, and eventually becomes like a nomadic community or nomads. Okay, so in one way, I mean, some groups after they run away from the village, they adapt one or another occupation, and in certain cases they, because of their occupation or trade, demand such a kind of lifestyle, they become nomads. So this was actually two-way process. Okay, there is a voluntary nomadism in resistance. So I see nomadism as a kind of resistant to larger society. So certain groups wantedly come out from the caste village caste system and lead a free life. Okay, but for their survival again they depend on the village society. Okay, and you see, and particularly, I mean, so if you see the topography of nomadic communities, the highest concentration is in Western India and Central India. Okay, this is again partly because of you can say the medieval period wars. Okay, from say I mean 12th century down to 18th century, there was a continuous war in this area, in this region. Okay, between Rajputs and Sultans, and also it continued later between Rajputs, Marathas, and Mughal. So this war actually produced a huge number of nomadic communities in central India and western India. I'll tell you why. See, when the army passes through a village, that village would completely smash. So, village community, knowing the army is coming through their village, they vacate the village and run away in forest, something like that. So, if the army is stationed there for a long time, they don't turn up. Okay, and eventually they take up some other occupation and becomes nomads. So, lot of groups means like Pindaris. Means who are the Pindaris? Largely, of course, later many of them becomes the foot soldiers in imperial armies, Mughal army, Maratha armies, and all that. So, but they lead in nomadic life, means kind of thing. So, this is one historical insight you can see. But these communities in one form or another form survived through various trade activities till 19th, say 18th century. So, a big blow actually started with the coming of the British. So, British actually from the beginning, of course, was very suspicious of these nomadic communities, because from 16th century when they were actually carrying out trade activities, they encountered these communities, and there was attack on their trade caravans by the nomadic communities, particularly Bhils, Meenas, and also Banjaras, Gonds. They used to attack on these caravans, and so they were from the beginning little bit suspicious of these communities. But particularly from the early 19th century, nomadism becomes the main concern of the colonial state. It is partly because the fear of the of the nomadism back in their European countries. So the experience, the fear of nomadism, which comes from their European experience, becomes a very crucial in colonial states' policy towards these communities. See, what happened in 16th, 17th century Europe is, with the enclosure of land, with the introduction of private property right, many communities actually were evicted from their land. Okay, and once they were cut from their livelihood practices, these communities again started of course for their bread, started attacking on the villages, and this becomes a serious problem in Europe to control these communities' attacks on the villages and towns. And then the European countries actually passed a number of vagrancy and paper acts to put check the movements of the nomadic and gypsy communities in Europe. So because of this fear they were actually very much worried about the nomadic communities. And nomadism, so from the 19th, early 19th century, colonial state had actually started different kinds of development initiatives in India. And these initiatives were also disturbed by the nomadic movements of the nomadic communities. Particularly, I have seen this in the case of the Banjaras, who were caravan traders, and trespassing from this end, this coast to the other coast, east coast to west coast. And when they are trespassing, these fields and areas, that was actually destroying not only the field but also the newly constructed roads and later railway tracks as well. Okay, and various of course forests. So like this, it was seen as a serious actually land order problem by the colonial state. And actually in 1816, the colonial state had brought out an act called Cattle Trespass Act, under which this nomadic communities and nomadic cattle movement were not checked. Okay, and also there was a custom system which was actually designed to regulate trade activities in India. But this new modern customs system actually hampered many itinerant nomadic communities, small petty traders. So the nomadic communities trade activities were very small, and then it was a completely unorganized kind of trade, and they were actually moving from one village to another village and selling their items and earning their bread. But colonial state saw this, even these small activities, as a dangerous to their market economy, and they were also brought under this Radhari system and chowki system, custom chowki system, and wherever they go, they were caught and taxed on their goods, whatever goods they are carrying. So like this, state was gradually controlling this, checking the movements of these communities through legal process. So and then actually at one point by middle of the say 19th century, colonial modern custom system or modern market economy system make the life of the nomadic communities impossible. So almost because by then forest had gone under the control of the state, communities were not allowed to actually access the forest. Basically a lot of communities were dependent on cattle breeding. So grazing was banned in forests, and there are some small communities who were involved in the basket making and mat making and rope making and all. So for the they collect raw material from the forest, and when their movement was cut or denied, their movement was cut, they become helpless. Okay, so I mean these developments gradually push many of the nomadic communities to embrace decaity. Okay, so gradually lot of actually communities started forming a bond and attacking on the rich villages. Okay, and this becomes a kind of practice in many of the communities, of course. But under colonialism, decaity was seen as a kind of group activity, and there was kind of stigmatization of this tendency. Okay, and all the communities who are involved in group decaity are brought under this Criminal Tribes Act of 1871 and declared as criminals. So this is another very draconian act which actually affected lakhs and millions of the people during colonial period. So there was once a community was declared as criminal tribe, whole community has to register themselves as a criminal. That is the tricky part of this 1871 Criminal Tribes Act, and there were also certain criteria to declare or identify communities as criminal tribe. One criteria is basically the predatory character of the communities. Okay, predatory character means depredation. Means many communities in India were attached with armies and like Pindaris, Banjaras, Bhils. Okay, particularly if you see Marathas army, lot of forest groups, means Gonds, were actually recruited in Maratha army. So a lot of and after the war, what they do is this group used to defeated that particular village, enemies village, and that become a kind of practice. So those communities which are involved in these kinds of practices were identified as criminal communities. Okay, and but I mean particularly if you see Minas and Bhils and Gonds in central India, there is this tradition of attacking on the neighbor villages as part of tax collection. Okay, so and this is seen as a political act by the pre-colonial states. Okay, so this I mean depredation is not a new practice. This has been there in the community, and they have been actually practicing this for a long time. Okay, and this under this becomes a kind of criminal activity under the colonial state. Colonial state branded this kind of activities as a criminal activity. So this is a very peculiar thing, I must say this here. And then there is another character which is used to brand particular community as criminal. That is masculine martial character and climbing Rajput ancestry. Okay, so those community which are said to be martial or masculine communities are the communities which are actually climbing Rajput ancestry. They were identified as criminal tribes. Okay, so means under colonialism, means after 1857 revolt, there was actually a tendency by the lower communities to climb Rajput ancestry or Rajput or Kshatriya status. Okay, so that you see across the country, and many communities actually from, as I told you, from medieval period, there was a practice of climbing higher varna within the caste system, and this has been happening. And after 1857 revolt, there was a change in colonial policy itself. Okay, so the colonial state realized that this political resistance are actually coming from the past ruling communities. Okay, so let us identify these past ruling communities, the communities which has a ruling past, and accommodate them in the colonial establishment. That was the policy used by the colonial state to neutralize the kind of resistant and whatever you call coming against the British. So, and then many communities, seeing these, many communities actually, for Jamindari rights and various other village headship and various kinds of things, many tribal communities were also started, nomadic communities, particularly in the Rajputan area, Rajasthan, central India. Many communities actually started climbing Rajput ancestry as well. So, and the other criteria is the communities which has no occupation, traditional occupation. Okay, so nomadic communities were basically seen as communities without any proper occupations, and it is these communities actually adapting dacoity as a source of livelihood. Okay, so nomadism was actually seen as a kind of form of dacoity by the colonial state, and all these communities, nomadic communities involved in one or two group dacoity, they were declared as criminal tribes. Also, communities which are worshipping freebooters. Okay, there is some tendency, particularly among Bhils and Minas, and also among Banjaras, worshipping freebooters. So this is seen one of the norm or criteria to declare a community as a criminal tribe. So like this, actually colonial state evolved a particular criteria to bring various communities under criminal tribes act. And colonial anthropology actually also contributed a lot in manufacturing the criminal tribes in India. Let me tell you this. As you know, many of you know this. In 19th century, there was a racial movement. Okay, there was a kind of quest to invent new races in world. So the German and particularly the European ethnologists saw the Indian society as a kind of laboratory to classify and invent new races. I mean, every community in India was seen as a kind of race. So the end product of this whole racial theory, it's a big subject, I don't want to go into this, but the end product was that the old races has a tendency of criminality. Okay. So and there was a method called anthropometry was used to determine this, which are the old races and which are the modern races. Okay, those communities which has round heads, they were considered as modern races, and the communities which has long heads were treated or considered as old races. Okay, and the communities which has long heads, they have a tendency of criminality. Okay, so that is how the anthropometry body measurement was used to identify Indian communities as criminal tribes. So they used to measure foreheads of some 30-40 members of a particular community, and give them a brand that you are so and so race. Okay, and that particular community, if it is found long-headed and old race, then automatically that community is yeah. After I think somebody is sending message saying wanted to ask the question. So after I think in 10-15 minutes I'll end this, and then we can go for discussion. Okay. So I think yeah. So these are the criteria, and they very systematically communities were declared as criminal tribes. So once a community is declared as a criminal tribe, they were put under serious surveillance, almost 24 hours surveillance. Okay, they were not allowed to move from one place to another place. In a way, the policing system and the legal system which was deployed to check dacoity among this community had manufactured criminal tribes further and further. Okay, because the system was such that once you are caught in this chain, it is very difficult to come out from this. Okay, so for example, say this generally dacoity became a very widespread during the famine, which is again the colonial phenomena. Okay, and once a individual or a particular community caught into this, very difficult to come out from this, because you would be put in jail, and to release again you have to deposit some money and some surety. So to pay back again that surety, they used to commit another dacoity. Okay, it was like a chain. Okay, so it was, and when they go from one village to another village, they are supposed to carry a paper from their respective village head or village patel. So village heads and village landlords were actually given lot of power to check the movements of these criminal tribe communities. So and the village landlords and village heads used to exploit them at the maximum. Okay, so and there so even if they want to come out from this and start a kind of a new life. I mean, so the system doesn't allow them. Once you are branded this, then you have to live with that, and that was the kind of practice. So and colonial state, I mean, so the policing system was really serious, and this despite I mean, so there is particularly not Western India, Central India, parts of Central India, also Deccan India was under the princely states. But even in the princely states, okay, the central dacoity and Thuggy and dacoity department has control. Okay, so they were actually monitoring this dacoity even in the princely states as well. Okay, princely states were in a way seen as a resorts for these dacoits and the criminal activities. Okay, so like this, colonial state were actually hunting down these nomadic communities throughout the their rule in India. From early 20th century, there was some slight change in their attitude towards these criminal tribes. Fortunately, from late 19th century, there was some officials in colonial administration who were greatly influenced by Bentham's utilitarian values, and they used to see this criminal tribes issue as a kind of issue of poverty and all that. It's a it is not a kind of earlier it was seen as a kind of occupation. I mean, it's pass on from one generation to another generation by the communities. But now it is realized that these are poor people, so to fill their bellies they are actually committing such activities. So there is a need to transform them, reform them, and make them more sober and docile bodies and useful to the state. So so with these motives and with this object, colonial state had brought out a act. Madras government actually first did it. Brought out a act, Criminal Tribes Act, under which in 1911, under which criminal settlements were set up to reform these communities. So these community members were brought at one settlements, and they were given some shelters there. Modern houses were built for them, and their children were put in some craft, carpentry and various kinds of work, and also some schools were set up. Some schools were set up for their children. So I mean, and the elders were also, the families were also given some amount of land. The idea was to settle them as permanent cultivator or peasants. But many of these communities were not used to the agricultural practice. Many of them were fortune tellers, religious mendicants, and cattle rearer, pig rearer, cow rearer, buffalo rearer. So they were not actually into this cultivation, and they were forced to do cultivation. And the land which was given to them was also barren land. I mean, the land was forest land. I mean, all the settlements were in the forest areas, and the area was also health-wise also not hygienic. There was a lot of mosquitoes which causing malarial fever, and a lot of people were also died. So these kinds of things were also happening. But there was a attempt by the colonial state. Actually, this initiative was initially started by Salvation Army, which was started by William Booth, is a a Christian missionary person, who was actually changed his name as Fakir Singh as well, and he used to work among the criminal tribes. Okay, so using the Christian modernity, he was trying to reform these communities in Punjab, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Orissa, as well as in South India, Madras Presidency as well. So, but later on, seeing this, so seeing the activities of Salvation Army, in a way, colonial state also started initiating such activities in the criminal tribes settlements. So, but ultimately, to some extent, they could settle certain communities, but the program was not very much successful. Means I can say that. One reason is that there was no positive response from the larger society as well. Means even the members of these communities wanted to adopt some a respectable trade and start their new life. The larger society, caste society, was not allowing them. There was this suspicion of this community as thieves and dacoits, always working on them. So colonial state this act was continued till the end of even after end of the colonial rule as well. In 1952, of course, with the initiative of Babasaheb Ambedkar, this act was repealed and reframed as habitual offenders act. But the stigma which was imposed by the colonial state did not go. That stigma still is continuing and hunting many of the DNT communities today. Okay, and it is because of this basically these communities are having a very very pathetic life, and they are nowhere. I mean, if you see the state programs and development initiatives, there is anything actually addressed to these communities, which constitutes 15% of the India's population. They are just left to their fate. And now with this new Citizen Amendment Act and this what is called this what is called National Population Registration program. So see, they would be the worst victim of this acts of the government, because all through the history they were moving from one place to another place, and now you ask them to prove their residency. So they can't. Okay, and what would happen to this community is nobody knows. So anyway, I'll stop here, and you can write your questions in the box one by one, so that I'll respond one by one. Thank you so much. There is one question from Venkatesh over here. Sir, can you answer these questions? Yeah. What is that? Were nomadic communities were subject to prostitution like hanging, etc.? Why there was no separate reservation category for these communities after independence? Okay. See, coming to the first question, were the nomadic communities were subjected to persecution? Yes, I mean, after the Maratha War, last Maratha War, after the last Maratha War, a lot of Lambada, means Banjara groups were persecuted, hanged. The reason was they were committing depredation after the war, because after they conquered Marathas, it is it was British property, and British doesn't want these villages now to be depredated. So when these groups Nayaks were doing this, they were persecuted, they were now hanged. Many of the leaders were publicly hanged and shooted down. Yeah. And then the second question, reservation category. See, when constitution was under preparation, these communities were still under this act, Criminal Tribes Act, and nobody actually was paying any attention towards these communities. Okay, so that may be the one reason why there is no reservation for these communities. Okay, and the other question from Aarti, Sunita, Subhash. What are different religious nomadic communities all over India follow? How conversion to Islam happened? See, regarding this religion thing, nomadic communities they have their own gods and goddesses. But with the introduction of the census, irrespective of their wish, all of them actually, unless they are Muslims, they were enumerated as Hindus. That is another tragedy. But there are some groups in the Western India, like Mayos. Mayos are now half Hindus and half Muslims. Sale Mayram actually has done a wonderful study on this community, and the book is also available, Against History, Against the State, and yeah, and many of them actually converted into Islam as well. There is a Banjara group actually in Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra border as well, the Balochistan Banjaras. So they also converted into Islam. Okay, because they were working. Maybe why they converted into Islam is maybe working for a long time with the Muslim armies, means Mughals and Sultan's armies. That might be the one reason. Venkatesh, why there was no special schedule in the Indian Constitution? See, this nomadic Venkat, these communities are now scattered. Okay. So, and they are in a very, very small group. So nobody were actually bothering about them. So that was so nobody was paying any attention to these communities because of their numerical strength. I mean, collectively they are huge, but individually they are very small, and they are called with different names in different regions. So it was very difficult to actually map out this community and bargain some collective rights for their development and protection. Okay, but they need actually a special protection in the constitution. The kind of police wrath they undergo, the persecution they undergo is really very heart burning. Okay, sir, can you talk about similarities between Romas of Europe and nomadic tribes in India? Also, why is there is so much focus on the Roma issue worldwide, but the DNTs? Yeah, see, Disha, yeah, that is a good question. There is a mythological articulation that this Eastern Europe Romas were migrated from India during the Sultanate and Mughal period because of the persecution in India. We don't know how far this story is, but the linguistic studies suggest that there are lot of similarities in terms of words and languages and all that. So, but I mean, sir, they use a lot of Sanskrit words. Of course, European, I mean, Indo-European language also has a lot of Sanskrit words. I mean, there is a, I mean, Indo-Aryan and Indo-European languages both belong to one family. So we don't know actually. There is a need for some serious study on this comparative study on these two communities. And why they are, I mean, so why their issue and their assertion is so strong is because it's all depend on, I mean, so, somehow that Romas maintained some cultural identity very strongly, and they proud of their culture and practices somehow. And somehow, I mean, the modern state in Europe also to some extent sensitive to their cause, and there was some kind of protection and some kind of accommodation for these communities in their state public spaces and as well as in social space. So that is this. Then Vikrant Deshani, sir, I am pursuing a doctoral study on Wagri, which is one of the DNT, but they are not aware there any procedure to criminal rights act outside of India in Europe countries. No, Disha, I was mentioning this paper acts, vagrancy acts. Okay, so there were these acts. These acts were actually promulgated to check the movements of the nomadic communities in Europe, in UK. So they are there, and actually the Criminal Tribe Act maybe. So there is this history, and yeah, Venkat Dasari, tribal acts and how British criminalized them. How should understand criminalization with these communities? See, as I told you in my lecture, this dacoity was a political act in pre-colonial India. It becomes a kind of a criminal act only under colonial rule. Okay, so a different language and a different stigma was attached to this practice. So that you should understand. That's only the difference between colonial and pre-colonial. Yeah, I think I responded all the questions. I think organizers have another program after this, so I'll end here. Thank you so much once again to our Nomad Liberation Movement members, particularly Disha. Thank you so much. Thank you.